everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our next installation of our coffee break webinar series, Working Together, Identifying, Cultivating, and Assessing Partner Involvement. We have a lot of great information to go over today, so let's go ahead and get started by providing a rationale for our topic today. So, one of the reasons why we want to have this conversation is because there are evolving expectations of higher education's role within workforce development. For example, in April of this year, the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Labor will implement a workforce integrated federal education and workforce system. Also, just recently, the U.S. Department of Education announced plans to implement to direct federal funds to increase the alignment of workforce development programs in grants and with state priorities. At the same time, there's emerging evidence that suggests that there's a lack of know-how in how to actually engage with industry partners. So one place to look at that, to how that lack of information is emerging is within the National Science Foundation's Advanced Technological Education Program, which generally requires grant recipients to engage with industry partnerships. So from a historical perspective, the Working Partners Initiative found that less than 2% of NSF ATE PIs reported formal professional development related to industry partnerships. At the same time, just as context, the NSF ATE Working Partner Initiative serves to advance understanding and skills for effective industry partnerships. So with that as context, we have 3 goals that we want to be able to go over for today. First, we want to be able to provide background on industry partnerships. Next, we want to introduce a 3-step process to work with industry partners. And then finally, we want to be able to answer your questions. So as FYI, I'm Lana Rucks, President and CEO of the Rucks Group, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Mary Slowinski and Rachel Bauer of the Working Partners Workshop. And as always, we have Elise Hopes with us as well, who is also serving to help in terms of moderating the Q&A in conjunction with Rachel as well. So just to help orient you to your screen, if you have questions about questions that you want to ask, just look at the bottom of your screen. You can use the Q&A question, or you can also use the chat function as well. So with that, let me turn things over to Mary, in which you can start providing some context around the Working Partners Initiative and some of the things that they found. So Mary?
Thank you, Lana. Welcome, everyone. And again, I'm Mary Slowinski. I'm the PI for Working Partners, the workshops part of it. And my co-PI, and well, she was PI, now she's co-PI. We flip back and forth. Rachel Bauer, who also is part of ATE Central. The way that it began was, and Lana referenced this in her earlier contextual slides, we started as a targeted research grant. We realized that there was not a lot of literature, there was almost no literature, a dearth of literature around community colleges and how they were partnering with industry. So we proposed to the National Science Foundation ATE program that we would do a research project to look at how community college workforce technician programs were partnering with industry, if there were emergent models, what some of the best practices might be, et cetera. So that was how this started, and that was back in 2015. Using a mixed methods approach, we found that there were definitely models. We started with a ton of them, and then we worked our way back. A lot of issues. We were able to find different information about how people were using these partnerships and et cetera. And then we also worked with the Rucks Group to develop a partnership assessment tool. And then we engaged again in the dissemination of the findings. So one of the key findings that we had were the partnership models. 8 of them. Although I would say there are 2 that if we were to go back, and we may with our next iteration, who knows, look at a couple of these I think might be combined. But This was through a lot of iterative work with the community, with the AT community. We did multiple surveys. We were part of the PI survey, which is required for the PIs that have received funding from the NSF AT program. So we had a very high response rate, extremely high. So that was handy, not something you always get. And we were able to kind of slowly narrow it down to these being kind of the overarching models that covered the various types of partnerships. Um, Pretty quickly, just to briefly talk about them, the advisory board, I think we all know what that is. Curricular development and review, if you're familiar with, there's a model called the BUILT model, the business and industry leadership team model. They kind of combine those, but we keep them broken out because if you do something like a DACUM, a developing a curriculum, which is a model that came out of Ohio State, that's frequently curricular development or review alone. It isn't your advisory board. So those are separate in our models. Faculty professional development, where industry assists with training or keeping your faculty up to speed. Incubation and entrepreneurship is oftentimes like maker spaces where industry gets involved with helping students learn more about, bringing their ideas to life. Instructional support, this can be anywhere from a tour, a guided tour by an industry member for your students, all the way through adjunct teachers. So any kind of support that industry does really directly with your students. Program support, dollar sign, that's money, donations of goods or materials. It's also sometimes, if you're working with a large company, they will help you out and with like marketing support, or they'll whatever their expertise is, they may leverage some of their supports in their offices to help the program. So we lump that all under program support. So goods or services that are donated. Sponsored research, you're not seeing a lot of, but it's a great model. And the bio sector did a lot of this, where industry has real world programs that they want to, real world projects, oftentimes back burner projects that they can't get through their R&D. So they send them off to the community college, and the students are able to work on real world projects in their own labs on campus. And then last but not least, the giant umbrella of workplace-based learning, which of course includes apprenticeships, registered apprenticeships, internship, job shadows, all of that. Particular umbrella is an umbrella because everybody calls these things different things. So we ended up needing to have a term that would kind of encompass them all. So this is one of our main outputs this is by model. You can see each of the models are there on the left. And this was the implementation best practices, challenges, I'm sorry, challenges, impacts, and implementation strategies. And this came again, this was distilled from interviews, surveys to begin with, interviews, and also going back and doing some small case studies of some of the different things that are happening in these areas. So this kind of was the summarization, easy to use. So put that together for everyone. So then we got to one of the last surveys that we did through the PI survey was to ask, how are you getting trained to do this work? And that was the message that, I mean, in the initial slides from Lana, that's when we found that, not surprisingly or surprisingly, I don't know. For me, it was not surprisingly, as I was a program chair, nobody was getting trained. 78% of the PIs, and these are PIs, these are schools that have pulled it together enough to get NSF funding and that they have administrative supports. 78% had no training whatsoever on how to work with industry, yet they were required to, not just by the NSF, but oftentimes by state initiatives. In Washington State, where I am, you're required to have an advisory board that you meet with twice a year. But nobody's telling anybody how to do that. And educators don't always know or don't always feel comfortable with that. So that we went back and we said, hey, we'd like to do workshops. We'd like to do professional development and assist with what we found and assist with building a collaborative practice around this with educators. And then from there, we went on. We've worked with teams, and the assessment piece, which we'll talk about next, also grew out of this work. And the workshops have been an incredible success. We're in a gap year right now, but we're hoping that funding will be coming back, and we'll be back this time next year, we'll be back at it. But we've had tremendous successes. 95% of the participants 18 months out after the workshops report, at 56% of them reported that participating in the workshop has significantly improved their partnership. So the workshops have proven to be extremely successful and very popular as well. So that kind of sums up where we are. So
Well, great, Mary. That's really a great summary and background information. Um, I'm going to pause here just to encourage individuals to use the chat function or the QA function, and we'll make sure to, particularly at our next question and answer session, to be able to start answering those. But we have a lot of information, so we just want to make sure we have enough time for the sharing of information as well. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started with you sharing out that three-step process for how to work with industry partners. We'll start with step one here, Mary.
yeah, so part of the workshops we have, everybody goes through the workshop each week. They do a small exercise, and the exercise is build to an action plan. And part of that was helping to get them to understand, or helping, not helping them understand, but helping them to ground themselves so that they can assess whether the partnerships are functional, whether they're happening the way they need to, what they need to do to adjust, and also what's happening with their portfolio, if you will, of partnerships across all of their efforts. So, the steps that we do and that have seemed to have worked well for people is the first step is to clarify the goals. First of all, go back and look at your goals. So before you go asking partners what to do or if they would help, clarifying what your goals are and how industry can help you do that. So we go through a process by which first we get the goals and we rework those as SMART goals. These will be what we call the truncated shorthand ones, but go ahead and fill that goal column. And you can see these are the type of things that you would need help from industry or you would want help from industry to do. So those would be in the workshop, you would go ahead and you would build those out with metrics involved. They would have metrics attached to them as well. But this is, we oftentimes say, just shorthand it for this because the next step is to look at each of these goals and say which type of partners can help us with this. Usually advisory board ends up clicked on everyone. It's rare that the advisory board can't do something to help. But you can see that different types of partners are going to be able to help you in different ways. So the next step that we would do is to go into each of these boxes that have each of these intersections that have an X and think about what that would look like. It's going to look different for different partners. So somebody who's used to donating money or goods probably isn't going to help you that much with, increasing student awareness of employment opportunities, right? That's not something that those type of partners are keyed in for, but they certainly can help you with the donation of the 3D printer. So you kind of, figure out which type of partner models, not people, but models can support it. Then you go and you dive into these X's and you think about what does it look like? What are the specific actions or the specific activities that you need from industry to support that one little cell in the spreadsheet? And then the next step comes in. The next step, you go ahead and you start with figuring out, determining the level of the industry partner's involvement. Like what type of involvement does each partner want to have? Now we've shifted that first part where you've done the optimal, you've looked at that crosswalk and you've said, okay, this type of partners, people that are in this type of category, we want them to do this, this, and this. You've made this master list of optimal involvement. You've made this long laundry list, we call it, of all the different things that the advisory board could do. And it's mapped onto those goals. But then you have this usually a long list, a lot of things. That's all done internally. That's all done by your team. That's all tied to your goals. But now you turn to the partners. And in step two, you look to engage in those conversations. You look to actually have that conversation that, what would you like to do? What can you commit to doing? And oftentimes it's a subset of the list. Usually you're hoping it is because this of course sets you up with metrics that you can then measure. But somebody might not be comfortable, mentoring new board members. So they go, yeah, no, I'm not really onto that, but I definitely would be happy to be sure I'm, at every meeting and so you figure out what this would be where you're working with an individual partner. We would call this the partner log or the partner record, where it's attached to a person or usually to a person in a company, but to a person. So you end up with this agreed upon involvement. Now you have kind of brokered a deal, if you will, of what they've said, yeah, I'll do that for you. So at that point, you've got the level of involvement determined. You move into step three.
All right. Well, why don't we
Sorry.
pause there for a moment and just see, Elise or Rachel, are there any questions that have come in that we want to be able to address at this point?
We do have one question, Lana. Why is it that we only consider optimal involvement when completing this?
Primarily because it's sort of like I think of it as almost like 0-1, right? So if unoptimal involvement would be it would be anything that they would do to help, right? But for us, what we're looking to do is narrow down, because what we found when talking with industry and through the research and through the experience of our attendees is that industry really wants you to be concise. They want you to be to the point and they want you to make a specific ask. They don't want hand waving, you know? So by looking at just what you need, so optimal, not anything else, you're really honing in on those exact things that you're going to ask for help with. So it's not necessarily a slider of you're not at this point, you're not looking of the degrees of optimal to non-optimal. You're really just looking for what you need. So when we talk about optimal, it's like what we need. It's not a performance measure on the partner. It's more just making sure that we've listed what we need.
Right. And th this whole thing is a starting conversation. So it's you could call it optimal or you could say primary. What we're trying to get to though is what do you as a project, program, whatever, what is the sticking point for you? What do you really need from your industry partners? So you don't want to start with the things that are sort of like, we could use a little help with this. You want to start with the things that are right up there, that are the primary optimal. What if you could ask for anything in the world? This is the thing you'd ask for, right? And Mary will talk about this and does talk about this a lot, that that's the beginning of the conversation. They may come back to you and say, well, we actually don't want to do that. Right? I mean, that's a whole thing that you have to work out. But the point is, we're starting with the thing that's critical. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
I have a quick question just as follow-up, and the individuals that you've worked with in terms of trying to encourage them to ask for what is that they really want and being very specific. Is that something that sometimes the participants in the workshops are a little uncomfortable with? Is that something that they have a reaction to? I just can imagine that sometimes educators or people within the academy may not be as comfortable kind of engaging with those type conversations as directly with industry. And was there any type of discomfort or kind of getting used to that idea before they could actually implement that?
It's funny. There's the discomfort or the difficulty is turning around and stopping thinking about what the partner wants to do and deriving this from your goals. That always takes a minute to flip the script because we're so used to feeling like we need to go with our hand out and be humble and be like, whatever you want to do, that'd be great. Because that's kind of the posture. And that sometimes is a difficult, flip in the mind to be able to go to, oh, wait, we have to look at our goals and let them drive what we need. That is one of the flips. And then actually, I would say the opposite is true in terms of once they get to specifics,
I think so
they
too.
have found so much success.
Right. It's
I mean,
empowering. Don't
really
you think, Mary? It's
success.
That's
Yeah.
empowering for
good.
them. Yeah.
Because they're like, we know now what we hear that repeatedly at the end of at the end of the workshop. Frequently, the feedback will be, I feel so much better now because I know exactly what I need to ask for. It really makes them feel like they have something concrete to go with rather than, hi, we really would love to have you involved with our program.
In
They feel
some vague
weak,
way.
right? They feel weak. The industry partner usually is, if it's someone new, is oftentimes like, I don't have time to suss out what it is that you really want from me. I don't, and then the conversation starts to get a little wonky, and then, it can go down really quickly, as opposed to these are the 10 things that we're looking to get support with. Will you sign on for any of them? That makes
Yeah.
them feel more comfortable to have that kind of script.
Well, that's wonderful. I love the word empowerment, and I just can also imagine being able to have these targeted conversations have real profound impact on their programs in general, or whether it's a program or if it's grant funded, what have you. So that's really great feedback and something people can really take away from this. Um, why don't we go ahead and jump into step number three and kind of continue through, like, what do you do next once you have this information?
It's interesting, we did a small little kind of test group with some of our alumni um,
Mm-hmm.
for this very process. And it was interesting because the first step of defining the optimal is a struggle. It's a struggle. It takes a while to hone them down. It takes a while to juggle them and see which ones and prioritize them. The second part of having the conversations with the individual partners is, sometimes challenging as well, but they feel, as we said, a little more empowered. They know what they're asking. This step's actually this is actually where it gets easier. If you've done it well, if you've done those other steps well, you're really in for a treat at this point. So what this is you go ahead and you look at that agreed to, and this is again a partner log, and now you get to fill in the actual involvement. So you look at what they said they would do, and you actually just, if you've done it well, again, if you've done metrics, if you've added metrics to your anything, you just look at this and you're like, okay, did they attend the board meetings and did they respond? In this case, will they provide at least one student placement? Did they? They really didn't. They gave us occasional opportunities. So it's really easy to look at that agreed upon involvement column and then say, well, what did they really do in the last year or 2 years or however long your cycle is of
Mm-hmm.
evaluation? And then the rating on the left side is basically very straightforward. It's like, was it below, far below? Was it somewhat below, or was it at or above? And that's kind of the rating. This this tool, this right here, we've spent a lot of time talking with workshop participants around this particular tool when you get to this point. And again, this is an individual partner. So we always ask them, would you show them this or would you not?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the basis now, as Rachel pointed out, that first optimal and that first agreed upon, that's like the initial setting of the cycle, setting of the what they're going to do. At this point, you can now go back and you can say, hey, you said that you really wanted to do this, but it doesn't look like that really has worked out for you. Is there something else on this laundry list of things that you might be more interested in doing? Or is there some way? Or, for example, let's say they never even said that they were going to come to all of your student, showcases, but they did and gave really great feedback. You're like, huh, you know what? That person really wants to get involved more with our students. We need to think if we can challenge, give them some tasks where they can do more student-facing work. So this gives you a chance to work with your individual partner and adjust and assess what you're doing. Now you take those ratings and you roll them up to the dashboard. And this is the dashboard. This was the original. It's been modified over time, but this is something
Mm-hmm.
that the Rucks group and we have been working on for a long time now. Now, in this case, the numbers carry forward. So if they were a at or above, below, or far below, it shows up on this in colors, which is lovely. The numbers get added to this. The beauty of this and the reason we call it a dashboard is because down the left-hand side, you've got your partners. And what this allows you to do as a program or a project is to assess your portfolio. Yeah, it does give you that look across the row of the partner to see how they're doing. And it gives you a number also of what the partner, when this is fully fleshed in, it also has a column on the far right that'll give a number that'll measure how active the partner has been across all of their promised activities. And down the rows, you can also get, what the model tallied at the bottom of the row to see how you're doing on your various models. But it also gives you a chance to, at a glance, to say, wow, you know what? We're not getting the participation we need from the folks that are supposedly doing program support. What's going on there? It allows you to, at a glance, look at your portfolio of partners and say, holy cow, we're crushing it, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe not so much, and that helps you look. And again, because these are tied to your goals, if you see that you're not, you're getting less than, like maybe they're all red because they're not producing, then you know you're not getting the support you need for those goals. You know, you can backtrack and go the other direction and say, oh, look at this. We're not getting any support for this. We need to amp that up in this next year or in this next cycle or what have you. So it allows the program or project to be able to kind of figure out what their next steps are as a whole, you know, not just the individual, the partner log, which we looked at last in step 2, that gives you that jumping off point to have a conversation with an individual partner. This gives you a chance to look at what you're doing across the whole thing and find out where those gaps are and what you might need to amp up or what you're really hitting great, you know, and maybe you don't have to put an emphasis on that because you're hitting it so well. Your partners are all performing, everything's good, you're getting those goals met. So that's kind of how we envision this dashboard. So
That's great because I know when we were first developing the dashboard, before it evolved to the dashboard, it was primarily from an evaluative standpoint. But as we were working on validation processes, we really opened up this whole new window that has really, I think, been really powerful. And you've kind of shown how powerful just thinking about the strategy around industry partners can be and thinking about it from a strategic standpoint. So it's really exciting to see the work that you all have done and how you've been able to leverage this tool. So before I get to the next Q&A, because we have just a couple of more minutes left, let me just do a summary of what we've covered already. So first, we know that there are changes within higher education that are going to require an increase in industry partnerships. In terms of working with partners, first, clarify the initiative goals and the potential role of the industry partner. Next, you want to determine the level of the industry partner's involvement, and then you want to be able to assess that. And then you're going to be able to leverage that assessment to develop the next iteration of that strategy with the industry partner engagement. Again, before we get to a question, if you do have want more information about the rubric or just about working partners just in general, here is Mary Slowinski's contact information where you can get a hold of Mary and Rachel as well to learn more about their work. But do let me just pause here to see if there is one more question before we wrap up for today.
Yeah, we do have another question in queue. Can you share more about how we're to engage our partners in this process, and is it only at the assessment stage?
oh no, I not at all. I would say that what we found for both in the research and in the practice is that these are relationships just like any other relationship, and they require frequent contact. It's always, I'll quote Amby Healer, the founder of Built, as she says, you know, always checking to see what we call it the WIFT, what's in it for them. And it's really critical. The assessment part, the evaluation of what they're doing is one thing, and you really don't want to do that in isolation. That's sort of a benchmark, a milestone. But as the years go by, as the time goes by, the things that are really great hallmarks of the really good partnerships that really last test of time and really are that they're flexible and they shift. And that what's in it for them is the key to that. Finding out, you know, what's in it for them. Maybe initially they were mandated by their company to get involved with educators. Okay. But then after they've been involved with you for a year or two, they're now what's in it for them is that they're really enjoying working with students. And then that, you know, the only way you're going to know that is if you touch, you know, if you have some touch with those partners and you stay tuned in, you stay aware of behavior, if they're not showing up anymore or if they're showing up more, and just checking in and making sure that you know it's building a relationship just like any other. And the stronger that relationship is, the more likely that partner is going to stick around and really become what we think of as like kind of the super partners that stay and are productive and are really, really dedicated to the program or the project. Thank you for the question, though.
Wow, that's a wonderful, a great question and wonderful response. And I can't believe we're at time already. Mary and Rachel, thank you so much for the work that you've done and for sharing that here today. We really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone that's attended here. We appreciate your participation. We will be following up with the video clip of this session together. And so I hope you enjoy your day, and until next time.